Hey, and welcome back to the latest installment of the Music History Project. Today's episode is all about music advocacy. We're happy you're here. Welcome to the Music History Project. We're your hosts. I'm Elizabeth Dale.
And Dan Del Fiorentino.
And Mike Mullins.
All of our content comes from the Oral History Program, which is sponsored by NAMM, the National Association of Music Merchants. And that is a program that is over 3,000 interviews and constantly growing. If you want to check out any of our content or any of the other interviews that aren't featured, please check out our website at www.namm.org/library.
So today we are going to focus on some of the amazing advocates that have been so strongly associated with the projects of encouraging music makers, both those sponsored by NAMM and those that began before NAMM's great endeavor in this realm. And it's so exciting because really we have a who's who today of some of the folks that have made a big difference in music advocacy and music education. So we're going to be hearing from those interviews, which all come from the NAMM Oral History Program. And Mike, I would love to get your thoughts about some of the folks we'll be hearing from today.
Well, we're going to be hearing from a wide range of people, some educators and some people that are just advocates of music in general. Some of the names include Karl Bruhn, Bernie Williams, Roy Ernst, Brenda Dillon, Scott Houston, Richard Riley.
I'll help you out. Tim Lautzenheiser.
Thank you.
Or Dr. Tim, as we like to call him.
Because no one can probably say his last name.
It's like calling me Dan from NAMM.
Yep.
And the last name we have, last but not least, John Benham.
Yeah, so all of these guys are closely associated with the efforts that we have here at NAMM and the NAMM Foundation in promoting music and music making. So it really makes a lot of sense to start with the guy that a lot of us have always called the father of recreational music making, a guy that actually worked here in the very building of the NAMM headquarters here in Carlsbad, and that's Karl Bruhn. Those of you who know Karl know that he was quite a strong voice in music education and spent a lot of time and effort in creating programs, those by Yamaha and others, to really encourage everyone to participate. And one of the areas that he was particularly known for is the idea of older folks getting back into music if they had it as a kid or always wanted to play an instrument but never really had the time until retirement. So this recreational music-making program really started, and Karl was considered a father. So, Elizabeth, you want to help us figure out what segments of Karl's interviews we're going to be hearing?
Yeah, we're going to be hearing from two separate Karl Bruhn interviews, one that was conducted in 2004 and the other one that was a follow-up in 2008. The first interview from 2004 is Karl talking about the National Education Music Council, how that developed, and some of the early advocacy efforts. And then the follow-up that came from 2008 was kind of outlining more of how NAMM kind of got involved in music advocacy officially with the start of the departments here, and we can kind of go over that timeline after it rolls. So here's Karl Bruhn.
The National Coalition for Music Education was put together, and that was NAMM, MENC, and NARIS, which are the Grammy people. And they came together because of the diverse assets of each, if you will, where MENC had communication with the music educators in the country, NAMM with music dealers across the country, and of course manufacturers, and NARIS with performers. So it was really a very unique coalition, and it got moving quickly. About that period of time, to learn more about it, I went to Sacramento, our capital here in California, and I visited with several lobbyists and elected officials. And I learned a lot. One of them laughed at me when I came in, and they said, music people are really very naive about this whole matter, because when it comes to advocacy for music education in schools, they come in with nice things on paper. They have quotes by Socrates and Plato and so on down through the ages. And then they smugly leave because they think God is on their side. And they fail to recognize that advocacy is about power and policy and the allocation of resources. That's really what advocacy is about. And anyone who doesn't understand that is perhaps not going to be successful with advocacy. So the first, I think we learned a number of lessons during that period. The first was that a political threat demands a political response. So if you have political action going on that is eliminating school music programs and so forth, you need some kind of a political response to that. And with that in mind, the coalition was formed and took the advice of Peter Drucker and his comments, which were basically this: if you're going to send, he said, a politician never sent people into the field without giving them a packet of brochures, telling them who to call on and what to say. And with that, we adopted the policy that our coalition really should be tool makers. And we developed things such as telephone trees, ways for people to call and put together advocacy groups in their local communities. And we heeded the advice of Tip O'Neill, who was at the time the Speaker of the House, which was all politics are local. And that's where the decisions, by and large, are made about music education, and that's with the local elected school boards. And I think it's important to recognize that school boards are perhaps interested in several things. One is getting elected, the second is getting reelected. And if they're going to support arts education programs, they really need something that will validate the decisions that they make, particularly when money is short, to support these kind of programs. So here again, supporting research was a way of trying to supply decision makers with information which would make their recommendations and decisions bulletproof, so to speak. We learned some other lessons during that period of time. I know in going around the country, at first I was under the impression that a lot of people simply didn't care about what happened to school music and arts programs, except perhaps the music teachers and the music dealers and a few of the students. And I was absolutely wrong on that point, because what I learned was that people care, and they care deeply, and they care passionately, but they didn't know how to care effectively in most cases. They didn't know what to say to a school board. They had to learn about these things, and that's where supporting with materials and advice on what to do and so forth, we learned a great deal. I was with Yamaha at the time. I'd been with Yamaha for 17 years and was invited to join NAMM as their first Director of Market Development. But before commenting on what happened there, I think it's important to talk about the times. For example, the report Nation at Risk had been issued a few years before. And if you recall that, the second or third paragraph said that if a foreign country had done to our education system what we've allowed to happen, we would consider it an act of war. And the report went on to talk about the importance of science, and it was a time, and the thing with it, the arts were conspicuous by their absence in this report. And that virtually became a mandate for the music industry to organize and try to do something. Also, music teachers and arts teachers were being fired. Music programs were being diminished. It was a very, very difficult time for the industry. And another factor was that NAMM was under a certain amount of criticism because they had accumulated quite a bit of money, and there were certain members, both wholesale and retail, that felt that NAMM should be investing in developing the market, and that was certainly a factor. And so at that time in the mid-'80s, somewhere around there, NAMM hired a consulting firm called Coopers & Lybrand, a very eminent firm, to do a study of the market and make recommendations as to what NAMM should do. And so that was kind of an exciting period of time for the industry, for me, and a difficult time for many in the industry. It was not easy.
Yeah, I can imagine.
So,
was there anything that came out of that Coopers & Lybrand study that surprised you personally?
Actually, it didn't. It validated some of the things that I and others believed in, which was to support music education, particularly at an early age, and the need to organize. And it talked about using the limited resources. I think one thing I should point out is that, their industry viewed NAMM as having a lot of money and could do a lot of things. If NAMM spent, for example, $1 million, it would equate to 1/4% of the national advertising budget. So clearly, NAMM did not have the money to advertise the industry out of a recession or a slowdown. It was that simple. NAMM had to develop a program that did other things. And so I had, as I said, been with Yamaha for 17 years, and I was very flattered to be asked to join NAMM. But in summary, I would say that the industry was under a great deal of pressure at the time from members to do something, and NAMM had made this investment in hiring a consulting firm that was a very eminent one, and that was a time to get going and organize a new department, if you will. When I think back on those days, the market development department was 2 people. It consisted of myself and Pat Page, who was a terrific executive secretary, and she was wonderful. And we had to do a lot of things. I think the first thing we did was to do a situational analysis of what was going on in the industry. Music education was being diminished, the Nation at Risk report. I took a trip to Sacramento to meet with several elected officials and a couple lobbyists, and I got a shock there. One of the lobbyists particularly said, you arts people come in here and you have all beautiful things with quotes by Plato and Shakespeare and Socrates and all these type of things, and then you smugly leave because you think God is on your side, and you fail to recognize that advocacy is about power and policy and allocation of funds. And once you understand that, you can really talk about being effective in market development. And that was something I will never forget. But the thing that I always remember also was that you have either people at work or money at work. And the ideal thing is you have combinations of both, people and money at work. We didn't have much money. We had a few people. The challenge was to organize in such a way that we got a lot of people working in a cause, so that instead of doing this, we did this, moving forward together. So I think that, let me just comment briefly about what we had to do with that. First of all, we started in August of 1989 to draft a proposal for the NAMM board, which would be, I think, in the following January or February, which we had to include. Here was a mission statement, strategy, budget, tactics, and so on. The big idea was support music education, especially at an early age. And again, you have either money at work or people at work, and we tried to keep that in mind. As we drafted through this first effort, it became very clear that we would have to work with others, and the 2 others which were logical was NARIS, which was the National Recording Academy, and MENC, which is the Music Educators Conference. Each had different assets when we looked at it. For example, at NARIS, we had the use of artists, for example, who could speak out eloquently about the importance of music and music education. MENC had obviously teachers all over the country, and NAMM had members, dealers all around the country who could be organized to advocate on the local level. And that was a very important thing, because all policy making really is done at the local level. That's where the action starts, and what we had to do. We needed a goal, we needed a mission statement, and the mission statement that we felt at that time was that every child deserves a quality education that includes music and the other arts. So that was the basis on which we went out and started talking to MENC and NARIS.
All right, so that was Karl Bruhn, and as we mentioned on the intro, we figured we'd break down kind of how advocacy works here at NAMM, and initially Karl helped set up the market development department, which then transformed to the Public and Government Relations Department, which is what we still utilize today, and that is the basis for the NAMM Foundation. And then the NAMM Foundation does the fly-ins with DC for their advocacy efforts, which we're going to hear more about later, and then takes on a lot of those programs to really kind of like the frontline efforts for community outreach and advocacy here within the building, which is awesome.
It's
Mike,
amazing. Their work is absolutely phenomenal.
Yeah, Mike worked a little bit with them, right, when you did your internship here?
Yeah, when I was an intern, I got to work with all of the different departments here at NAMM, and they seem to have one of the most fulfilling jobs in the building because they're bringing music to schools and to more people that wouldn't necessarily have access to it. And on a larger scale, they're making sure future generations have access to music and that it's always a part of education for kids, which is just a great thing.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people can sometimes maybe forget that our ultimate goal here at NAMM is to put instruments in the hands of kids and continue people playing. And the foundation does a lot of that work for us. They're kind of the end goal.
And what they've been able to do that I've always been enamored with is the fact that they've been able to get some great cheerleaders along the way, folks that have the same feelings and goals that they do, but bringing them under their umbrella and having them as celebrities or as people who are well known in the community to use these talking points to communicate the same message, but to broader audiences or the people who maybe didn't even recognize that this was a struggle for education or a policy, but then to have somebody like Bernie Williams come in on the fly-ins to Washington broadened a lot of people's understanding and awareness as to what these issues were and how to get them addressed. So I guess that's a perfect segue into the next segment.
What do you know? So here's Bernie Williams talking about his work with the NAMM Foundation, specifically the fly-in that they do.
Can you talk a little bit about your experiences with NAMM and working with the fly-in and the music education advocacy programs?
Yeah, it was such an honor to be part of that group of people that year after year we go down to Capitol Hill. And they kind of like, I'm just so glad to be used as this poster child of somebody that grew up with a really deep exposure to music and how that exposure helped me to become a successful in many ways non-musical person, because I don't really utilize music in the sense of being a musician, but I utilize what music taught me to be creative and to think outside the box and to become a really good, successful Major League Baseball player. You utilize it in sports, the rhythm, the timing, everything that I learned in music was so useful for me. And obviously the work ethic, the discipline, everything. And that was the message that I was trying to convey to all these Congress people and senators that maybe perhaps didn't have that sort of perspective from somebody that has loved some music so much. We like to think that we did make a difference. At some point, they passed some laws that allows funding to come to allow music and arts to be part of the core curriculum in public schools. So I think as far as anything that I've done in my life, to make a difference, I don't even count baseball or sports. It's stuff like this that you can say when you're old, man. I was part of this movement that was able to influence lawmakers to create something that is going to help a lot of kids and it's going to help people and it's going to change things around. So it has been very rewarding for me to be part of it, and I'm looking forward to what's next.
So that was Bernie, and one more shout out to the foundation. If you guys are super interested in music advocacy and their efforts and some of the struggles that are going on in current legislation, we highly recommend that you check out the NAMM Foundation's podcasts that they have, which is Talking Up Music Education with Mary Lerson as your host. So check that out if you're interested. It's a really great program.
And just another note on Bernie Williams, as a young kid and a baseball fan, it was so awesome when he came here to the NAMM building, and we got a chance to sit down and interview him a little bit later. Fantastic guy, and as you can tell, very passionate about music and music making. So having him as one of the cheerleaders, one of the folks giving us the message, I think has been fantastic. And of course, one of the messages that he gives is that music is for everyone, and that's a good transition into our next guest, Roy Ernst, who is really the father and the founder of the concept of bringing older folks who are retired or just want to get back into music or never played music and wanted to pick up an instrument. He developed the New Horizons Band concept. So we'll hear from him from his NAMM Oral History interview. And it's really cool because his work is being done every week here in the NAMM building, and I know around the world. There are several New Horizons bands in community centers and rehearsal halls at your local music store and places like the NAMM headquarters here in Carlsbad. We have our own band. And to have these folks come in and learn an instrument and hearing them develop over time is absolutely fantastic. And to see the pride and the smile on their faces, the relationships that they make with each other, and just the idea that they can share this music with their family and friends at different concerts and venues in the community is absolutely amazing. And I think about Roy every time I hear a band, a New Horizons band, because this was his idea. It's so cool to know one single guy created a program that has helped so many, many people. So it was a real honor to interview him. So if you don't mind, Elizabeth, what are we going to be hearing about from Roy?
Everything you just talked about.
Oops, spoiler.
Roy. No, Dan, I was just thinking to myself that Dan's just been on fire with the transitions today, so maybe I'll just take my headphones off and go take a nap or something. No, nice. So here's Roy talking about New Horizons and the development of that project.
Well, I was thinking about this in the 1980s, in the mid-1980s, and I talked about this idea of a band for people who are retired. And I think that was on my mind because I was looking at people I knew who retired, and it looked to me like they retired, they played golf or watched television for a couple years and died. You know, I mean, retirement didn't look very fulfilling to me. And I thought, wouldn't it be great if these people could have the same kind of experiences that kids get in a high school band, for instance, where they're part of a group, they have an important contribution to make to that group, they have events to look forward to, like concerts, maybe looking forward to taking a trip someplace, same way kids do. You know, we'll go to Toronto and we'll play in a music festival. And I thought, there are probably retired people out there who think, what's coming up? And the answer is nothing. And so I was really focused on the fact that music could improve quality of life for people. And at that time, the feeling was very widespread that if you didn't learn music as a kid, you missed your chance. I mean, it doesn't make any sense. But people thought kids learn music, adults don't learn music. And there's a window of opportunity for learning music, and it's in childhood only. If you didn't take advantage of it, you missed your chance. And so I had to overcome that. And so when we started that first program, there were a lot of people who weren't sure they would be able to learn music. And now we don't have to overcome that anymore because we see senior adults doing so many inspiring things. I mean, retired people are capable of doing just about anything they set their mind to doing. And so that part of it's all been accomplished. Now, all we need to do now is give them more opportunities. And the New Horizons Band is one way of doing that. It creates an entry point to making music for people with no musical background at all, or for people who perhaps played in high school and have been doing something else for 40 or 50 years. And that's what really distinguishes New Horizons from a community band, for instance. In a community band, it's assumed that you can play your instrument and that you can read music. No instructions provided for that. You have to know that when you come in. And so many of our community bands are really terrific to the extent that they require auditions. And that's hardly a welcoming opportunity for someone who thinks, gee, I think I'll try getting out the clarinet again after 40 years. So people coming back to it need a comfortable situation for re-entering music. And New Horizons really provides that for them.
How did you come up with the name?
Well, we had a contest in Rochester, and there were a lot of nice names put forward. One that I remember that was pretty popular was The Grateful Alive. And, and I like that, but I thought, well, in time, people will forget what that's all about. And so although it's really nifty right now, I'm not sure that it will last long. And actually, I picked the New Horizons name myself, although I didn't tell anyone about it. I never identified who really did pick the name. And it's worked pretty well for us. I mean, it gives an idea of people seeing new opportunities, which is one of the things I like about the name. It kind of gives an attitude. One of the things I don't like about the name so much is it worked just fine for peanut butter, you know. I mean, we could have New Horizons peanut butter. And I do see New Horizons, all kinds of things. New Horizons retirement centers, New Horizons daycare centers, and I'm noticing now that the latest spaceship is headed towards Pluto is New Horizons.
Really?
Yes. And so a lot of other people picked that name. I don't know that we were the first and that they all followed. There are probably other people picking that name beforehand. I certainly wouldn't assume that
I think it's also a church, too.
No doubt. No doubt. But anyway, it has worked pretty well for us, and I think the test is that the people and the groups like it fairly well.
How did you help me fill in a little gray area here? You're working at Eastman, which you have your own students and so on.
Mm-hmm.
How did you get this outside a university program started?
Okay. I talked about this idea to a friend of mine who was a music dealer in Rochester. And we had discussions several times about this. I said, this was Wendell Harrison. I said, Wendell, you know, one of the things I want to do is start this program for retirees. And Wendell was always encouraging. That would be great. And then one time he said, Roy, I'm on the board of NAMM. And he explained to me what NAMM was. And said, if you would like some financial support for starting that program, I could probably help that. And so that's when I decided to move ahead, and I put together a little grant proposal, which was for a very small amount of money, and it was funded by NAMM. And the program started 15 years ago this month.
Is that right?
That's right. And I was, I didn't know what to expect. After I got NAMM to agree to support it and Eastman on board, the medical school gave it its endorsement, and I thought, wow, what if no one shows up? And so I was, the newspaper said, well, what do you think will happen? Who are you expecting to turn out for this? How many do you think will come? And I said, well, there's no track record, so I'm not sure. But I'd be delighted if 10 or 15 showed up. That would be great. And so I think we had close to 40 show up. And everybody said, wow, isn't this a great success? I mean, he was looking for 10 or 15, and he got 40. This is fantastic. And that's always made me think, well, what if I had said we should at least have 70 or 80 show up, and 40 showed up? They would have been saying, oh, this is getting off to a pretty weak start. I don't know that this is going to be such a good idea. So it's made me kind of a believer in stating goals that you can exceed, and that makes everyone feel very good. So we had the program. people absolutely loved it. They were pleased with their accomplishment. The NAMM representatives liked it a whole lot. And NAMM talked with me about what we should do next. And I said, well, if we were inventing baseball, if baseball didn't exist now, when we were inventing baseball, we would now have one team. The world of baseball would be far more interesting with more than one team. I said, so what we should do is start more bands in different locations. And there will also be people who will say, well, you can do that at Eastman because the Eastman School is very well endowed, has a lot of money, but I don't know that we could do that in a lot of other places. So we should have more bands in different locations. And I met with a representative of NAMM, and we picked locations that had very strong music dealers that would support the program, and also music educators who would take a leadership position in the program. We picked those programs, and they worked out very well. Soon after, there is interest from NAMM in going further, and I encouraged them to support me so I could take a leave from the Eastman School of Music and work full-time on this for a couple of years. We did that, and by the end of that time, we had about 50 bands. And after that, it was kind of on and off, working at Eastman, taking some time, part-time to work on the New Horizons project. And a few years ago, Joe Lamond and I were talking, and I said to Joe that we should really create an organization that could be responsible for carrying this on. I said, because something might happen to me. I mean, something will happen to me. And there might be new leadership at NAMM that has no interest in this. It happens. And so it would be great if we had an organization that could be responsible for communications, for supporting new groups, for making things happen. And so we set about to form this organization called New Horizons International Music Association. That started 2 years ago. We have a wonderful board of directors. In fact, they're taking over many of the things that I did, and I serve as an advisor to the board. And I feel very definitely that New Horizons has a future that doesn't depend on me and doesn't depend on NAMM, that the people who are actually involved in this now are going to make sure that it continues. So that's a nice accomplishment.
Absolutely. How many bands are there now?
We have 120. Wow. 120 bands, orchestras, choruses.
You must be awfully proud of that.
It's a very good feeling, and the best feeling is to visit a site where I can remember having a planning meeting with people, sitting around with a few people and talking about how we're going to start this. And I go back, and now there's a group there, maybe a band of 50 people or 80 people having a great time. And you can't believe how many thank yous I get. So, yes, it's been very gratifying.
Well, it's so neat. I mean, all of these guys have a deep passion for music and music education. And capturing that as part of the oral history program has been a real delight. But having an opportunity like this at the Music History Project podcast, we're able to share these concepts. And I think this is a brilliant opportunity to tip our hat to Elizabeth Dale, who does all the prep work for all of these podcasts, the flow of all of this content, and bringing out these particular segments of these interviews is not easy. I know it's a lot of work, but she puts a lot of care and her own passion into it, which I think is awesome. And it obviously comes out in the results. So thank you for your efforts.
Oh, no problem. You're just trying to butter me up because I'm going to be long gone by this time this thing airs.
No, I have nothing to lose.
So next, we're going to kind of round out this segment about specific music advocacy programs that were developed either in partnership with NAMM, or NAMM Truly Embraced. And we're going to be talking about recreational music making, which Dan mentioned earlier was kind of the brainchild of Karl Bruhn. But we're going to hear from two new voices, the first being Brenda Dillon and the second being Scott Houston, talking more in depth about recreational music making.
I can say one way that I've seen it progress is that I think it started down a path of being total wellness, which I support, and the research certainly going along with that. But as different ones are getting involved, they're making it a little bit more unique to the way they think it should be. And I think that's a good thing. Karl and I have had lots of conversations about that. For example, the first 8 weeks that I taught it, I did try to incorporate some of the breathing and some of the things that RMM was really promoting. And then I got away from that, and the reason I did, I realized that the real wellness of the students that I was teaching had to do with having fun. They were learning to play piano, which was their lifelong dream, but we were having a good time. And I decided that laughter was more important than breathing exercises or anything else. So I think those are the changes that would be evolving. I can't speak so much to the other instruments. I know about New Horizons, and I know certainly when it was started at Eastman, I had an opportunity to watch and see what they were doing there. I just loved it all. And then the Weekend Warriors, I've heard Joe talk about that, and I know we have those groups in Dallas. Have great respect for the whole drumming and all. We had a clinician at the National Conference on Piano Pedagogy who did drumming sessions, and the piano teachers loved it. But he really taught intricate rhythms, and he divided the group into some interesting ways. It was a wonderful session. I was particularly gratified because he had been one of my students at my first college teaching job. And here he is, this huge success in the drumming world. I can't take any credit. But it was really fun to make that connection again. So the evolution to me is that I think there are just more people climbing also on board this bandwagon. But that can't help but be a good thing. That's what it's going to take. If we're going to really go after the 95% or whatever percent it is that we've heard during the session here about that freeway, we want that freeway in. That's what it's going to take. There's going to be a lot of us who are going to have to think, that sounds like fun. And then we're going to have to let our rigidity go and start having fun with making music.
Well, now that you brought up recreational music making, what are your thoughts about what has been part of the success of that? Is it just a matter of getting people to get the light bulb to turn on, like, oh yeah, I can do that?
Yeah, I think, and it is becoming more. It's happening much slower than I expected, quite frankly. I mean, my world, my little piano world, my show, and the people that do what I do, mine's going gangbusters. But I really expected that snowball to be bigger than it is now. It's happening for sure, which is good news. And just as we tape this, I've literally just stepped out of an annual RMM meeting, so it's top and front and center in my mind. But I think one of the big deals is, we just talked about it, I did a presentation in there, and I've kind of distilled it thinking about doing this presentation, that I think one of the big things is that, whatever the percentage, whether it's, 15% and 85% want to, or 2 and 98, whatever that percentage is of, what I always refer to, we've been dealing with, here's the serious musicians, and then there's 97% of the world that are not, that wish they were, or would just want to play in some way. Whatever that percentage is, it's really hard, I think, for all of us that are in the music industry, whether you're a store owner or you're a musician. We're not the 98%, we're the 2, right? And it's, no matter what you do, and it's not in any way diabolical, it's not something that anyone's doing on purpose, but just, we are in the music world. We're in the business. You work for NAMM. I do this. It's what my living. I've staked my identity around music my whole life. I'm in it. I'm one of them, right? And by being that person, I think we all, I mean, this whole show, you know, there's thousands of us at this show, we all exude, without even trying, this aura of, I'm a musician. And the inverse of that is, you're not. You know what I mean? And that's, I think, the thing you got to step over. If you can bridge that divide and get past that, because on the inverse, what the 98% say, and it's so funny, you're going to laugh when I say this, because everyone's heard someone say something like this. The other side says, oh, I'm no musician, I just play for fun. Right? That's exactly, and some version of that quote, they'll say, you say, hey, do you play piano? Well, I wouldn't call myself a musician, but yeah, I play a little bit. Or, you know, I wouldn't call my... And that kind of is interesting to me, that they've actually extracted the term musician from sitting down and playing an instrument. Like, no, I haven't gotten to that level. And I'm thinking, well, if you're playing, you are a musician, right? And so at some point, I really think, long-winded answer to your question about this RMM thing succeeding and moving on, that to me is key, that we can somehow step out of that realm of we're in and you're out. Or even, and I don't think we really feel that way as much as they feel they're not in. It's almost an inverse. And if you can lay that down, which is what I think RMM is doing, to say, look, you don't need to do this grade. We're not taking tests. No one's going to grade you. It's fine. We're having fun. Which is why drum circles are. I'm so jealous of the drum world, because, you know, everyone can immediately sit down and bang on something and do it. And, you know, we just can't do that in the piano world. There's a few more efforts, but it still doesn't take months. It takes, you know, a few more minutes. But you still can't just sit down and get the visceral, you know, feeling like a drum world, or a drum circle. But I really do think, and that's what we were talking about, that there are a lot of different vehicles to do RMM. And I know there's been an official, you know, definition of its group playing and all that. Well, I've been kind of an outlier in that thought. And, you know, I think what I've been teaching for 9-10 years, and we've had literally hundreds of thousands of people do it, I would consider that recreational music making, yet they've all done it by themselves in their own homes. You know, so I think there's a lot of different flavors of it. But I think the overriding thing, and that's okay, I think that's good, whether you're doing ukuleles or guitars or drums or piano, whatever it may be, organs for that matter, whatever it is, I think the key, as long as the focus is, you know, playing and having fun, that to me is if someone's playing and they're not struggling and they're having fun, no matter what the instrument, I think we're going to win that battle. And then someone will say, well, yeah, I play. And they can go ahead and say it if they aren't, well, I'm not a musician, but... I'm like, that's all right. You're still playing, and I still like hearing you play, so there you have it.
Very cool. So what do you think the future of recreational music making is? What do you see in the future?
I think it's, you know, I'm not a store owner, nor have I ever been, but if I was, I would look at recreational music making as the moat that would completely defend my business. I mean that. I mean, you think people will always buy something where they have fun. I mean, it's the old golf club analogy, right? You know, I've got a golf pro friend. Just true story. You know, I would say, aren't you freaked out? You know, here I am driving to come meet you, and I passed Golf World of Golf, Discount Golf. You know, Golfers Are Us, or whatever it is, and I got 2 pictures from Amazon today selling golf clubs. Right? I'm like, how are you staying in business? And he's completely nonplussed and says, Scott, he said, you can't go to a store and play golf. He said, the only place you play is where I am. He said, and as long as I'm doing a good job as a golf pro, making sure that people come to my course and play and have fun. He said, and I got to help them get a little better. So if I have a good lesson program, I teach, I get my golfers, and I'm not teaching them to be Tiger Woods. I'm making sure they're hitting straight. That's about it. You know, and he said, and I understand that, because they just want to get a little better. They're not trying to go out and win tournaments. And similarly, you know, they come to have fun where I am. That's why we have, you know, you ever seen golf leagues? That's why we have leagues. That's why we have mixed leagues. We have men. We want people to come and have fun. And what really struck me with that, and I thought, man, that's it. That's kind of the analogy. People go to a golf course or to a golf club, whatever, to have fun and play. And then, like, secondarily, oh, and by the way, they're probably going to spend a bunch of money. You know what I mean? It's one of those things. But that's not the purpose. You go to play golf. You don't go to the club to go spend money. You go to play and have fun and play with your friends, whatever, play in a league. And I think we have it almost upside down in the music, to a lot of music dealers, that you go, you know, I think consumers go to a music store to spend money in the hopes they can go have fun and play, right? I mean, it's almost this thing. And I think if I was a store owner, I would want to say, No. The way I'm going to build my own market and defend myself from anyone, I don't care if it's Costco or Walmart, whoever you may feel threatened by, and it'll change, I'm sure, in the years to come. The way you do that is you develop your own community in your own store, and your store quits being as much it's funny, it's an outward thing, but the focus of the store is you've got to be the place where people come and have fun and play. And if they do that, you're going to get your fair shake, assuming you're conscientious about selling correctly and all that. You'll get a share of that. And that share will be enough to keep your store open and make a decent living, and you will be able to sleep well at night. And I really, it's a good phrase to use, I think. I think RMM can be the moat that would defend an independent retailer's business for life if they choose to keep doing it. No one can penetrate that. People will buy things where they go and hang out and they're part of that community. It's the reason I bought my last tennis racket at my tennis club. I could have bought it 100 other places, but I went in there, I played it a couple times, and I know the guy that's stringing it, and it's my community. And I overpaid for it, I'm sure, and I don't give a diddly-do. I was happy to give him the business. And I really think that's a phenomenal analogy to music stores. And be more of a community center and less of a, not less of, but if you do that well, the sales will come.
Very interesting. Yeah, that's a great
oddball thought. So take that for what I ever did. Have I ever owned a store? No. So maybe it's completely upside down. But I really, that would be the only way I think I'd approach it. So I think, long-winded again. Back to your question, where's RMM going? I think it's the future, because there's no way you're going to defend a retail store against I think online stuff is just going to get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and it is. Welcome to the world. It's like, if you made buggies and the cars started coming, did you assume that the cars were going to go away? At some point you just came to the realization this is the new paradigm. We have cars. People aren't hip to buggies anymore, and so you do something else to do it, whatever. And I think it's crazy to think that online stuff's going to get smaller. It's going to get bigger, and it will. So maybe you get your piece of that, but and all these other things and the retailers that to defend that, you need to create a community, and I think RMM does that. And not just one. In a store, I wouldn't just have a piano program or just drum circles. I try to do them all. If someone walks in the door, you don't say, "What do you want to buy today?" You say, "What are you playing, or what are you interested in playing?" "Oh, I've been a drum." "Really? Well, we've got drum circles that go on twice a week." "Really?" "Oh, yeah, I used to play some guitar." "Really? Have you ever thought about, hey, we got this Gamma program that, you play some things, or I saw a guy playing ukulele." "Yeah, I know, it's a hot new craze. We got 3 groups a week that do that." "Or I want to play piano." Do your programs, plug people into it, and just know confidently that within X amount of months, and it's not going to happen that week. That's a hard thing too. I think it's tough when guys are trying to pay their rent every week to think that long term. But you develop that program, multiple programs. You put enough balls in one end of the pipe, some of them are going to drop out the other end in the form of sales, and they're going to buy it from you because they know you. And they want to be there, and that's where they are, and that's their sense of community.
That was Scott Houston, who most of you may know from his PBS program that taught so many people how to play the piano.
Oh, yeah, the piano guy.
The piano guy, yeah. It was so awesome. He was at a NAMM show, and I said, "Hey, Scott, you have a few minutes?" And he was so gracious. It wasn't pre-planned, but he rolled with it, and we got a great interview from him. So I've always been enamored with his efforts, not only on his program, but everything that he does in the community. He does a lot of speeches at colleges and elsewhere. Just a really great guy. And it's wonderful to hear his passion and know that he's got a major influence, that he takes a responsibility to expand that and help with programs such as those funded by the NAMM Foundation.
So I think we should have Mike do the next introduction. He's been awfully quiet today.
I can do that. I've just been napping over here. Don't mind me. So we just talked about kind of the programs that were put into place here at NAMM and all over the world, I guess, for people to get into music more and to advocate for more music education. And now we're going to talk about some inspirational educators or experiences that some of these people have had that really launched them into full advocacy mode. It made them want to get out and help develop music in areas where it may not be as accessible. Thank you. So first we're going to hear from Bernie Williams again, and he is going to be talking about what his teachers provided him with.
What have you gleaned? What do you say when asked about your teachers? What have they provided you?
Well, the most important thing that they have provided me with, it has been just this enthusiasm and passion for music, to understand such an abstract term and concept that is so vast and encompasses all cultures, all social stratuses, and everything. And if you go to the core of the thing, is vibrations and frequencies in air that you're able to hear, and for some reason you hear them and they go from here to here right into your heart, and they cause this, they can cause countries to rebel, they can cause people to do crazy things because what they feel about the music that they hear. And it's such a fascinating concept that if you get a little bit closer to understanding why is it that it's so profound and so deep, you're able to maybe create some of your own and have a good time doing it, understanding that you got to create from some substance, from some starting point of some knowledge. You can't just play any old thing and call it music. You have to have this knowledge and respect for the people that have done it before you. And to me, that was the most important thing, to have a purpose and to understand also that it's not only about the music, but about the cultural thing and how to you provide the kids, especially kids that don't have the means to be exposed to this kind of education, to provide them with the opportunity to have that, because it has been proven, it has scientific proof that kids that are involved in music at a young age, it makes their brain learn at a better rate. They do better in math, in science, all these abstract concepts. And even though they may not become musicians, they are using this really powerful educational tool that is music to enhance their education, and that's basically what it's all about. And in the meantime, along the way, if they end up loving music, why not? It's a great thing. It's just a win-win situation for everybody.
So that was former pro baseball player / music advocate / musician / great guy.
Yankee.
Yeah. Bernie Williams talking about his experience with music teachers. And we're going to hear from Karl Bruhn's 2004 interview next, and he's going to be talking about the importance and power of music.
If you go back to, for example, the Republic, and you talk about the beliefs of Socrates and Plato, both of them believed very, very strongly that music should be controlled by the government because it was so powerful and could influence. And for example, the healing temples in Athens used music and so forth. My personal feeling is that if the MDA was any smarter, they would be the MDMA, because if they knew how powerful music was, they'd probably want to control it. But music, as we're learning through scientific research now, is really very important, and particularly groups, for example, like in recreational music making. There are a number of studies that cite the importance of group dynamics, and there's one study that says, and this is really, I think, very, very powerful, it says that perhaps more important than diet or exercise is the ability to communicate in community, the bonding with other individuals and so forth, and that may even be more important than the genes we inherit from our parents. So the use of music is something powerful. When I was working with the Music Therapy Association, I was impressed by something that I'd never heard of before, and they use music for medical outcomes, not performance outcomes. So music is not used as a performance, but actually it is for non-musical outcomes such as stress reduction, tension, loneliness, and so forth. So music can be used in many ways, and the more I thought about that, the more logical it seemed. And so while we have to consider importance of performance criteria, we also have to think about all of those people who've fallen through the cracks over the years because they were told they didn't have any talent and so forth, and therefore virtually denied the benefits that can accrue from learning to play an instrument and enjoying it, and just for relaxation only. And I guess one of the things that I always remember is that after World War II, Brunswick developed bowling alleys. And they were not doing well. And so they hired psychologists and various motivational experts to come in and evaluate why they weren't filling the bowling alleys. And I think the interesting thing was that after all this study, the conclusion was people don't feel that they're bowlers until they break 100. And once they break 100, they buy their own bowling ball and uniforms, and they join a league and so forth. And in the case of music, we have never developed what we call breaking 100, where people learn to play well enough to keep going before they get discouraged and quit. So breaking 100 is really kind of what recreational music making is all about, where people are playing something that's enjoyable, they're bonding with the group, and it's doing many, many things for them. It's far more than just learning to make music.
That was Karl Bruhn, and I just would like to pause here for a moment just to say how proud I am of the relationship that we were able to build with Karl. Long after he left as an employee, he stayed very close to NAMM and our advocacy work and the foundation. And I was able to reel him into the oral history program, and I'm so glad I did because he had great ideas, wonderful advice. He made many trips to Japan during his professional life, and he provided me with all kinds of wonderful advice on my first couple of trips. And I just want to say how grateful I am to him and all the things he helped us with personally and professionally within the oral history program, as well as the advocacy and the foundation work and all the things that he has done to help encourage people to become music makers, which I'm so glad is part of his legacy. That's exactly what he would want, and that's exactly what he worked very diligently to create. So it's wonderful that we can remember him and his contributions during this podcast today. So up next, we're going to hear from the former Secretary of Education of the United States, Richard Riley. What's he going to be talking about?
So Richard is going to be talking about seeing music education benefit people and just reflecting on the impact of his work throughout his career. And he was, as Dan mentioned, he's the former U.S. Secretary of Education, and he served during the Clinton administration. So he probably got a little bit more of a voice working with a president who was a musician.
That's right. And I just want to say as a side note, when I got to go to his office and interview him, it was quite an interesting, probably the only time my camera was examined the way it was examined. I had to turn all the lights on, and I had to show what each cable plugged into. It was really kind of cool. I love the security level before getting to Mr. Riley, but what a wonderful, warm guy, as you will hear in his clip.
When I look at music education, and I'm an outspoken proponent of that, you say, well, what are the benefits? What are the benefits of music education? And the benefits are plenty. One thing about NAMM, though, when we talk about benefits, they insist on us also supporting that with research. NAMM is very much into research. What works? What doesn't work? Can you prove that music education improves this, that, or the other? It is very clearly that it does, but we always use research to back that up. Now, so what are the benefits? Well, one thing is clear that there are certain foundational things to learning. And music education really helps equip you with those foundational things that help you learn. The capacity for creative thinking, the capacity for various skills and knowledge that are necessary for a successful life. That's important. Those are all critical things that music provides. Backed by research, yes. I read a recent research from principals, scientifically pulled in from all over the country, and they clearly found that music education would enable a young person to, yes, stay in school longer, to graduate, less dropouts, more graduates, all of those positive things that are a result of quality music education in a school with a high-quality teacher.
So that was Richard Riley, and that kind of rounds out our segment on inspirational educators and experiences. And we're going to move on to our next topic, which is the work that is still going on, that is constantly going on, and that's the effort to continue to save music programs in schools. You just constantly see them being cut, unfortunately. And in some school districts, you've kind of seen that trend start to plateau where they're not cutting the arts as quickly because people are starting to get the data that's been pushed so heavily by groups like the NAMM Foundation to show the benefits of music and arts in education, especially early childhood education. But unfortunately, it still happens. Districts still run out of money or out of time or whatever their excuse is, and we don't see it. So we always need people out there fighting to save music.
Well, one of the shifts that I've seen just in the last 10 or 15 years is efforts of advocacy going towards policymakers and providing that same information to parents. And locally, I know for sure there's at least 3 music programs here in the San Diego area that have been inspired and encouraged and maybe even supported financially by the parents who are saying, we want this in our schools. So that information broadening to people who can make a difference no matter who they are, even if it's parents that kids will only be in that school for 4 years, it's still making an impact because now that program's been established and oftentimes they are continuing with the next group of parents. So that's been a real shift, I think, in recent years, which I'm very, very proud of all the people who have done work in that area, 2 of which are really probably the folks in my mind that are the faces of this campaign. And those are the same 2 people we're going to be hearing from next.
So the first one is going to be Dr. Tim, who we talked about a little bit earlier. Mm-hmm. He's a real big ally with the NAMM Foundation and the work that we do, and he's a real subject matter expert on saving music programs in schools.
Plus, boy, he can fire anybody up.
Oh,
his speeches are fantastic. Nobody sits down during his talks. He's almost a preacher, and that's a wonderful thing. So
besides Dr. Tim, we're also going to be hearing from John Benham. And John goes around to different school districts, and he speaks to try and save music programs. He crunches numbers, he works with data to really convince school districts that proactively, hopefully, as opposed to retroactively, reactively, that they shouldn't cut their music program. Here's the data, here's the cold, hard facts about what you can do to save music financially and the benefits it'll create for you and the kids, which I think is phenomenal.
Well, what's great is he has such a great success record. He knows exactly what to say. He knows what information to provide, and he's there to help. He's always at the school programs helping, and I think that diligence and that passion is transferred to those in charge who say, yeah, this program really matters. It matters to this guy. It should matter to our parents and to our kids. Let's do something about it. And he's made a real big difference. I mean, I kind of think of him as the music man, traveling around and really encouraging people to pick up an instrument. So I'm so proud of the fact that we have an interview with him and we can share some of that with you today.
So first, we're going to hear from Dr. Tim talking about how every child can make music, has that capability. And then we're going to hear from John about music getting cut and advocating for music education. So here they are.
I love to play basketball. I love to go out and shoot the ball. I'm not a very good basketball player. And if my athletic teachers or my coaches had waited for me to ascend to a level of expertise, I would have never made it. I would never play basketball. I like to play piano. I'm not a very good piano player because I won't dedicate myself at that level. But that doesn't mean I can't play piano. And I think there's a place in music for people who want to do it for the sheer joy of just participating and making that music. Maybe I'm not the greatest singer in the world, but I can sing in the community choir. And I can still express myself like I want to. Because there's no other place in life I can do that.
What do you gain from that?
Well, there's no question that trips the creative mind. And that's a part of the mind. That's the archetype for every forward motion in life. If we're going to move forward in the cure for leukemia, it's going to come from that part of the mind, where people can organize data in such a way that we create the solution. And that's where musicians, that's why their mind, when they always say, the smart kids are in music, or whatever that glib, flippant phrase is, What really it is that we're creating that mind to be able to take on more rigors of learning.
Have you seen that?
Oh, well, I mean, there's no question when you look at the data of the music students against the other, and we come to some quantum assertions about that. I'm not sure those are true. I'm not sure. I mean, we've made a big leap about it, and sometimes it's done more harm than good. But there's no question that when students become musicians and start making music and learning music, there's no question that everything else in their life goes up in accordance with that. So whether we'll ever be able to quantify that, we're getting closer. But there is a relationship there, and we have to acknowledge that.
And so we moved back to Minnesota, which was home, into a district we had selected because we knew it was one of the 2 or 3 best music programs in all of the Twin City area of Minneapolis, St. Paul. We moved in on August 28th. The first week of September, an $8 million levy vote went down, and they mandated a 70% cut in the orchestra staff and a 48% cut in the band staff. I became an advocate. Yeah, you can do a lot of things to me, and I'm pretty much a man of peace, but when you come after my kids, there's a different side of my personality that comes out. And yet I knew that with the upsetness in me, it didn't do any good to get mad at people, because I discovered all 7 people on the board and the superintendent had kids in music. They didn't want to cut the music program, but when you've got an $8 million deficit and you're looking at cutting 150 out of 700 teachers, somebody has to go. And that's where I first discovered that a financial crisis exposes your educational philosophy. And music was indeed going to go first. I decided at that point, being, of course, a college professor with a doctorate, that I could rewrite all the books on music education philosophy that have been written and do a better job. I did 1 paragraph and I threw it away. I said, this is ridiculous. If I go in there and argue about philosophy, everybody's going to agree with me. I've got to come up with a solution that defeats their financial argument. And I struggled and I struggled and I struggled. And I know that the meeting I had to present at was on a Monday night. And it was Sunday night at midnight. And I still didn't have the answer. I knew it was there somewhere. I just couldn't pull it out. The midnight I said, I might as well go to sleep. 3 o'clock I woke up. It was like God wrote it on the wall. It's in the numbers. And I had the numbers. And I sat down and I started writing. I wrote until 6 o'clock the next night. And went and presented at the meeting and discovered that our music teachers had an average of 210 students compared with a classroom teacher who had 125. If they cut the instrumental music program, they're going to have to hire 1.6 teachers for every music teacher they lost. Or stated differently, each of those teachers at the secondary level who was teaching 1.6 position was really paying for the elementary instrumental program. Well, I presented that to the Board of Education. No one had ever done that. And of course, educational finance and budgeting goes against pretty much every principle of accounting because everything's done on averages. And I understand that because they don't have enough staff to really deal with the financial value of each salesperson, if you want to put it that way. Well, the board saw that report, and they voted 7-0 to reverse the decision. We saved every music position. And the district went back 14 years in the tenure track, cutting math, English, science, and technology, STEM. Well, that was 1981. Word started to spread. I say that there are really 4 keys to saving a music program. One is a music coalition, because decision-making is political. You have to have the votes. The second is a unified teaching profession who doesn't undermine each other. And the most recent example of that is a district in which the music coordinator recommended cutting the elementary instrumental program that had 8,900 students in it, suggesting that they'd recoup those numbers in the choral program. It just coincidentally happened to be a choral director. So I keep telling my own profession we're sometimes our greatest own enemy, that we need to be music educators, not band, choir, orchestra, or general music teachers. because we're here for the kids, not our program.
So once again, that was Dr. Tim and John Benham talking about saving music in schools. And for our last little conclusion segment, we're going to hear from Karl Bruhn's 2004 interview again. And he sums everything up perfectly, talking about music advocacy and the issue with music education. And I'll just let Karl take us out on this episode of the podcast.
The story goes like this. On a very crowded airline flight, there was a young mother with a baby, and the baby was crying and crying and crying. The flight attendants tried to hold the baby, but nothing happened. The baby kept crying. And finally, there was an elderly gentleman who walked up to the young mother, held his hands out, and she eagerly gave him the baby. And within a few moments, the baby was sleeping, and he handed the baby back to her mother and went back to take his seat. The person next to him says, well, thank you for what you did. He says, I'd like to buy a drink for you. And he says, what do you mean, what I did? For what I did for all of you people on the plane. He says, no. He says, I didn't do it for you people. He says, I did it for the baby. And I think what we have to do when we're talking about school music programs is we have to do it for the kids because it's good for the kids. We need to remember that. We need to remember several other things. That advocacy, for example, is not about an event. It's about a process where we talk about advocacy all the time and the importance of music in people's lives and that type of thing. So it's not staging one concert or doing that type of thing, but advocacy is an ongoing thing and it must be addressed constantly if it's going to be effective.
Well, as you can tell by these different segments, many of us here in the NAMM building and the NAMM Foundation really believe strongly in the importance of music and music making, and we're so very proud to have been able to bring you this episode dedicated to the music advocacies who have really been the proponents of this concept and the cheerleaders behind many of the programs that have been developed and initiated with the sole goal in mind to perpetuate music making. So I want to thank all of them for all of their efforts, thank all of those involved with the NAMM Foundation here at the NAMM building, and I also want to take a moment to thank Elizabeth and Mike again for all their help in putting this together. Thanks for listening.
Yeah, thank you guys. We'll see you in 2 weeks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
You messed up. That's the first time I got to say bye.
Bye.